This week, we take a look at the new Stormstrike Chariot, and I'll run through my painting method for my Custody style Stormcast Eternals theme, including some tips and tricks for getting the most out of this fantastic model. Stick around for the painting guide. When building the model, I chose this for my sub-assemblies, each unit almost built in full. I did, however, take the wheels off the chariot after the base coat to make it easier to dry brush. This kit doesn't have a lot of spare bits. You have the choice of either the bow or the spear. I hear competitive players are leaning towards the spears, but I really like the look of the bow, so I decided to use that in this build. The painting method for the base coats will be similar to the method used in my batch painting video that I will link at the end of this video, but I'll quickly run over those steps now. I start all of my storm coats with a base coat of black. I'm using an airbrush, but you can achieve a similar result with a rattle can primer or brush on primer. Just make sure you adequately thin your paint so you don't lose any of the detail. Then I start dry brushing. Dry brushing is best done by using a makeup brush. This will leave the model looking smooth like brushed metal. I'm using a mix of Retributor Armor and Doombull Brown. The brown will remove a lot of the metallic sheen, but that's okay. We just want to lay down the base colour, and the dry brushing will leave it mostly black in the shadowed areas. Next I mixed Guilliman Flesh contrast paint with some contrast medium and coated all the gold areas. The contrast medium helps to reduce how much of the contrast colours you'll see in the raised area, while still allowing the pigment to rest in the recesses. While this is drying, I covered the silver areas with a regular brush using Vallejo Game Air Silver. Any light silver will do, but I think this one looks fantastic for any Sigma era painting. Back to the gold, I'm doing a light dry brush of Retributor Armor with the tiniest bit of Game Air Silver. You don't want to go too heavy, or all of the work you did on the lower layers will be lost. Take your time with this step. Next I'm going to do some areas of dark gold on the shoulder pads and chariot. This is with a mix of Gore Grunter Fur contrast paint and contrast medium. About a 50-50 mix should be fine. Then while that was drying, I started working on the silver areas again with a coat of null oil. This shade paint provides a simple way to darken the metal and its recesses while keeping it still looking like metal. Starting to paint the bird lion creatures, I'm using a large brush to coat their hide in Avalon Sunset. Where possible, I'm making the strokes in the same direction the hair would normally run. This may take a few coats, but be patient. This colour looks really nice for any lion-like animal hide. While they were drying, I used some Doombull Brown with a small brush to paint the hair and weapon handles. Later I'll use some Bugman's Glow for the highlights of these areas. Using Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm going to base coat the cloth areas. If you're using a different colour for the cloth, then no problem, just pick 3 shades or mix them yourself. Work from the dark areas first and then slowly blend in the lighter colours. The 3 colours I'm using is Evil Sun Scarlet, Wild Rider Red, and Fire Dragon Bright. Try mixing them to create a smooth transition if you want to put some more time into the project. One more thing I need to do before I can start assembling the model is dry brush a very light coat of Stormhost Silver over all the metallic areas, both the gold and the silvers. This is what really makes the model pop on the table or in photography, and makes the armor look a little bit more worn and battle hardened. For the feathers on the bird line things, I started by coating them with Wraithbone White and purposely left it fairly light so some of the darkness underneath will continue to show through. Then using Gore Grunter Fur contrast paint to let the model do most of the heavy lifting and bringing out the beautiful sculpted feathers. If you want to leave the feathers as they are at this stage, that's great, but I'm going to do a very light dry brush of Screaming Skull to make them look a bit more like feathers and also highlight the detail. At this point I also take a moment to go back to the cloaks and add some extra layers of detail and highlights as mentioned earlier. Now it is at a point where I was comfortable with starting the assembly process. Being a push fit model, it can be a bit harder to assemble after the paint has dried on the joins. For this I'm going to use my sprue cutters to shave these points off and also going to use some glue to connect it all. For the basing I'm using some Vallejo basing paste and a rubber sculpting brush to apply it over the base. I removed the chariot for the first part of this process to make it a little bit easier to apply the paste under the animals. The thing you want to be careful of, especially with push fit models, is that you don't end up with any obvious gaps underneath the model because of the paste. So just be a bit careful when you're applying this down. You may notice at this point I also used Gorgrunner fur contrast paint on the tail tips of the bird lions. I thought this would be a nice touch. Once the base paste is dry, the following day I'm using Screaming Skull to dry brush a highlight on it. Once this is done, I'll give the ground a healthy dose of Agrax Earthshade to darken it and add to the shadow effect. I also use Agrax Earthshade on the wheels just to grunge them up a little bit so it doesn't look too neat. The rest is mostly small detail work. I use Black Templar contrast paint for anything that's black. For leather it is Doombull Brown with a highlight of Bugman's Glow. For the horns and beak of the animal I use Screaming Skull as an undercoat and Basilicanum Grey contrast paint. This colour works great for bone in the cool colour range as opposed to Skeleton Horde, which is my go-to for warmer colours. I also use Screaming Skull mixed with Avalon Sunset on the animal hides in areas that need to be highlighted. You can use shade, but be careful, it's difficult to use shade paint over yellow without running into problems. Once everything is painted, it's time to add some tufts. This is a challenging model to base because I want to use a lot of tufts to really bring the base alive, but this is a scene that implies a lot of motion. So the more you add to the base, the more you potentially take away from the feeling of motion. So this is just something to be mindful of. Here is the end result. I'm quite happy with how it turned out, and this was a fantastic model to build. My only criticism is that there isn't any room for different poses, and I've heard people considering running several of these in their lists, and mostly in the spear configuration. So it might look a little samey on the table. It would have been nice for a few different posing options. So, did you find this video helpful? I've been doing a variety of hobby content and I'm trying to make sure I cover all skill levels. Was this beginner guide easy enough to follow? Please let me know in the comments and I'll hope you enjoy your brand new Stormstrike Chariot for your Stormcast Eternals. Thank you for watching.